Hi everybody, I'm Sherry Grunska, and this is the Horse Barn Management Show, and it's put on by Pro Barn Management and myself. And if you are watching, let us know where you're from. We have a fun topic to talk about tonight, and of course this is always a Q&A, so you can ask me your questions anytime you want, and I will try to answer them the best I can. And we're going to jump right into it. I wanted to I guess I'm going to talk about it real quick here. I just want to let you know, some people have asked, we're still working on our videos. It's just taking a lot longer than I thought it would. So I have to watch the third one and see if there's any other changes to it, but we'll have it on Vimeo pretty soon. So if you want to check those out, they're on Vimeo. And don't forget to go on probarnmanagement.com. You can find all our books there and all our other live shows that we do, and podcasts and vlogs, and I guess blogs too. So anyways, we're going to get started. I wanted to talk to you about how to determine your board rates. And this is equally important for someone who just has a couple horses they're boarding, or if you have a huge facility, or if you're buying a place. This is really where the rubber meets the road, because what you set your board rates at is going to obviously determine what your revenue is coming in. And then, of course, you have all your expenses, and this is where people get messed up. So I want to talk about that, and where do you start? How do you figure it out? And we built our barn, and we built from empty farmland, so it was a lot of guesstimating. And basically I did what I think most people do. I went around and checked. Now, this was 16 years ago. There wasn't really Facebook or anything like that, but I went around and found out what all the boarding stables were charging in our area. And, you know, I didn't even really think too much about what they offered for actual care and services, or what their expenses were. I just was looking at what they were charging. And so I felt like, okay, well, if I keep my price like $10 lower, then hopefully it'll bring people here, because in my head I thought that $10 was going to be a magic number. And I really want to talk about that, because that's a myth, and it's something that people get hung up on. And it comes, you know, everybody deals with it. It comes with the territory, but people get hung up on, oh, if I just make my price a little lower, you know, then I'll get more people. And you want to get clients, because obviously you probably have a business mortgage, you have lots of expenses to run your place. And what I try to tell people is to stop thinking like that. I don't want you to think that a lower price for your stable for boarding at your barn is always better, because it's not. I want you to start looking at it a whole new way. And I want to, I always think of this with Starbucks coffee and cappuccino, all this stuff they sell. They are one of those places that, you know, you could go to the gas station or Quick Trip or someplace and get a coffee and pay $1.98, and you could go to Starbucks and pay $8 an hour for kind of the same thing, $8 for the cup. And so I want you to think about what you offer for services, because you could easily maybe charge more than someone else. And you have to remember that you just need to sell yourself on what you offer. And you also need to really wrap around your head all your expenses, because it doesn't do anybody good if you're losing money and you have a bank note, and now they're getting kind of concerned because you can't pay the mortgage, or you're behind on your hay, you're behind on your electric. It can be a vicious cycle. Or you're so broke that you can't hire employees, and now you're burnt out. And I can tell you that because when we first opened 16 years ago, You know, what I did was probably one of the stupidest things you could do. When we had done our business plan, we had figured out our board rates, and we had to guesstimate on a lot of prices because we didn't know what it would cost to, you know, for example, fuel for a year to run the tractors, the skid loader, the four-wheeler, all that stuff. We had to kind of guess, and I was lucky that my husband had worked on farms and he had a really kind of a decent idea of what things would cost, but a lot of people don't. And we had to guess, and what ended up happening is I didn't think of a lot of those things. So when we started to advertise, what I did is I actually lowered my board rate more so than what was even on our business plan, and I didn't even tell the banker. And it was just such a dumb move, but I didn't realize all the expenses, I didn't realize all the work that was involved, and I didn't realize the value of what good horse care is. And I just, in my mind, I thought I have to fill these stalls, I have to fill our outdoor board, and it ended up really putting us backwards for quite a few years. And so I want to talk through some of this. And if you have questions, jump in and let me know. I think what most people do when they are building a place is when they're getting closer to the time when they're going to advertise, I think a fear kind of goes over them. And I know it did for me, and it was a fear of being able to get the clients, have the horses, the revenue, and that kind of starts to dictate how you run your numbers. And most people, I can tell you, I have talked to so many people over the last probably 6 years who have boarding stables, and they started off way too low, and now 6 months into it they have called me and they're trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way to raise the board because we're really $100 too short per horse, and how do you fix that? And I'm going to tell you right now, it's harder to go back and raise the board than to start off at a higher price. And I know that from experience. And so this is, you know, if you're in that situation, you're definitely not alone. It happens to so many people. And then they're scrambling trying to find out where they're going to get that extra money from. And that's what we did. We set our prices too low. If you are new at boarding and you haven't gone through all 4 seasons, you don't know what all your expenses are going to be, you're going to be doing some guesstimating. And I always tell people to guess on the high side. It's better to guess high, because I'd rather have you do it that way and have a surplus and be able to put that money in savings than to be short. And that is really important. Now, one of the things that most people do, like I did, is they go around and they see what all the competition is, and they'll say, oh my gosh, well, that barn over there, they have this, and they charge, you know, $450. But everybody else is charging $600, or someone's charging $500, and there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to it. And sometimes what I have found is that depending on the boarding stable and depending on the owners, sometimes the place could be paid off and the money isn't, they don't have a mortgage to pay anymore. Or sometimes what happens is they're just letting things go. They're not fixing things. You know, sometimes boarding stables are in foreclosure, and we're finding that out a lot, that there's a lot of barns that are closing down because the barn owners have not kept good records and they're losing money left and right. So I don't want that to happen to you. I want to talk about that. Now, this is super important. I want to talk about this before we start going through all the different expenses. Okay, the reality is that there are people out there that are willing to pay a lot of money for premium care for their horse, and then you're going to have people out there that are cheap and they don't want to pay. They will cringe at the thought of having to pay over $150 a month. And they'll come to your barn, and then when you tell them how much your board rate is, sometimes, or at least this has happened to me, you know, you can see in their eyes, they're wondering, well, why is it so expensive? I just want to throw my horse in the pasture. And this is where it's really important for you to understand what you're offering and what type of clientele you want. And I'll tell you a little story. So, gosh, this was quite a long time ago, but I was at the fairgrounds. My daughter was showing her horse there for the week, and I did have one person who, it was a family, they had a horse for their daughter and the husband. We were all kind of sitting around talking, and he kind of was sarcastic with me, and he said, so tell me, Sherry, what really do you get for your board at your place? And he was saying it because he knew that our place was higher than any other place in the area. And he goes, I'm not understanding. And he didn't understand what premium horse care was. You know, his idea of good horse care was putting the horse in a herd, and it didn't matter to him, or he didn't know enough to see if the horse was stressed, maybe because it couldn't get to the hay, or it was getting beat up a little bit. You know, there was lots of different things going on there. You know, if you have a person who is looking to board and they don't understand what good horse care is, and maybe it's a brand new horse owner, and you want to ask a nice dollar amount that you feel is a fair rate for what you offer, don't lower your price to please that person, because they don't get it anyways. You need to keep your price at a very fair rate, but you need to be paid. You need to be paid at the end of the month. You need to be able to pay your employees. You need to pay yourself and pay for all your bills. And it's okay if it's more expensive. It's very expensive to take care of horses. So if you get someone who doesn't get it and they want to do everything on the cheap, then they're probably not the right client to have at your barn. If your barn is going to be an upper end barn, that's going to be more expensive. Now, if you're going to have, let's say, a couple horses in your backyard that you're going to board, and they're just, you don't have an indoor arena, or maybe a lot of the amenities that other bigger barns have, you can definitely do a lower price. But sometimes it doesn't mix well if your board is a lot higher than maybe the other places, and someone is on the cheap and they don't want to spend the money, it might not be a good fit for you. And you just wish them the best and try to send them in an area, a stable that maybe is better suited for them. So I want you to think about that. The other thing too is, a lot of new horse owners don't understand sometimes really ultimately what good horse care is. And I have found that some of the most appreciative boarders are the boarders who have unfortunately been at bad boarding stables where their horses lost weight, or were stressed, were getting beat up, were out in weather that maybe they shouldn't have been out in, and without shelter. Lots of different things. Maybe the barn owners promised this, and didn't come through with all those things. And once they realize that they need to get out of there because their horse isn't doing good, and those type of people really appreciate a barn that's well run, and they're willing to pay the extra money so that they know the horses are happy and are thriving and feel safe and are getting plenty to eat. And so I have found there's lots of different types of boarders, and history plays a big part in it. Do you have any questions, Sherry? Okay. Let me see here. I'm just going to go through my notes. We're gonna talk about figuring out your rates and kind of some of the things to figure out. Your location is going to be huge, and you have to realize you have to have a balance in this. So for example, where we live in Wisconsin, we're about an hour and a half from Milwaukee. What we charge at our barn here is a very fair rate. We're real happy with it. It's not the highest in the area, but it's up there, one of the higher rates. But it's still a lot lower. If we were to take our whole property and move it to Milwaukee, we could probably get almost double board. So it really depends on how close you are to the big cities, your location. We're in a good location, but still we are in an area where everything is a lot less expensive. You know, housing is less expensive. All that is less expensive. So location is important. When you are looking to set up a barn and you're going to be thinking about taking out a loan and figuring out all the expenses, you also have to know that your board rate can't be out of the ballpark so high that no one can afford it. So, for example, if everyone in the area where we are, you know, they could be anywhere from 300 to 400, maybe 450 in that area for an indoor arena and turnout and stuff like that. If I was to all of a sudden have so many bills and my overhead was so high that there's no way I would make it without having my board be about $800 a month, there's probably a good chance that I might go out of business. Because there's just a lot of people around here are just not going to pay that. So you really need to know your area. Where if I was down in Milwaukee, like I said, Chicago area, people would pay that in a heartbeat. And you have a lot more professionals and the income is higher. So you would definitely, you know, there I would fit right in, but here it just wouldn't work. So you need to kind of understand that. If you go way too high because your bills are too high or you've borrowed way too much money, you could be in for some problems. So I don't want you to get there with that. Okay. So we're going to go ahead, and what I did is I have a list here of, these are expenses that people often don't think about when they're setting up their board rates. And so I kind of wanted to talk about some of these and just kind of get for you to think about it. If you are going to work a part-time job or work a full-time job and have a barn manager, you need to figure that out, because if you're going to be working full-time, you're going to be paying someone to manage your barn. If you're going to be there full-time at the stable, you still need to pay yourself because you have to live. So I want you to think about that. The first thing is your business mortgage, and obviously people will ask, well, how big of a stable do you build? You know, how many stalls? And you're going to have to take some time. This isn't something you figure out in, you know, 30 days. It was a 2-year process for us. It was 9 months of putting together a business plan to figure out what number of horses we could manage and where we could actually bring in revenue and make this a living if we both were home. So you need to figure out your expenses, and part of that is figuring out, if you're going to build, what size are you going to build and what's it going to cost. Now, if you're going to buy a place that is already in operation, it might be a little easier, because I'm hoping, it doesn't always happen this way, but I'm hoping that the person you're buying the place from has really good numbers of what their yearly expenses are on everything: hay, electricity, you know, grain, water. So I want you to think about it, because there's 2 different ways to go about it. So are you going to have a business mortgage? Most people do. The second thing, which is probably the most familiar, and this is something that your boarders, when they look for boarding, this is what they think about, is your hay. What's your hay going to cost? You really need to wrap your head around what your hay is going to cost, and you need to divide that out by the number of horses, you know, per week, per month, per year, to figure out exactly what you're going to be spending for the year for hay. And it's going to fluctuate up and down a little bit depending on the season. So right now fuel has kind of skyrocketed. So hay, if you're having hay shipped in, your trucking fee is probably going to go up, and you have to make sure that you have that in there. So I want you to think about that. And your bedding is going to be one of your next highest expenses. And depending if you do bulk or bagged, that's just something that you want to think about. That is something that's a little bit more stable, and it may go up a little bit depending on just expenses, but it's not like hay, where hay, it really fluctuates every year depending on the growing season and what the weather was like. So you really, bedding's a little bit easier, and your grain, of course, you'll have to decide, like I've talked about, if you want to include that in your board or not. So now I want to talk about some of the other things that your boarders definitely won't think about when they're looking to board at your place, and they don't understand that these are some of the expenses that keep the operation running, and you have to be able to pay for them. And the first thing on your list is utilities. And when we built our barn, I can remember the electrician saying to me that we didn't have enough lights in our arena. He wanted to put a third set of lights down the center of our arena. And my husband and I said, no, I think 2 sets are enough. And he says, no, it's not going to be bright enough. And it was bright enough. And we just went with 2 sets. He also, it's quite interesting now, this was 16 years ago, but he also told us that our electric bill was going to be about $1,000 a month. And that is all I could go on, is what he was telling us. And this was an electrician, this was a professional, and it turned out that our electric bill was nothing near that. In the summer months it's really low. In the winter months it goes up because we're heating a lot of heater buckets and water tanks, but it's definitely never ever hit $1,000. I think in January and February it's hit around 700, maybe 800 once, when we had a really cold spell, but that's just for like a 2-month period. And so you really want to think about that, because this is all really important. If you're going to board horses and you're doing it for a business, you need to know what these numbers are, because it all gets taken out as far as your board. Instead of saying your board's going to be $400 a month or $500 a month, before you set a price, you have to figure out some of these expenses, and that all has to go in there. Okay, one of the things that really depends on where you live, that is often overlooked, but is water. So we are very fortunate here. We have well water, and we don't pay anything for it. So that is great. But I did go to a barn out of state to work with them, and they were in the city limits, and they had water that was connected to the whole city, and their water bill was like $2,000 a month, and that is a lot of money. And you got to remember, people are washing their horses all the time when it's hot. They drink, we know they all drink a lot of water, and just so much going on there, and that is crazy money. So if you're, you really need to understand, first of all, if you have well water, that's one expense you won't have to deal with. But if you're tapped into city water, you're going to have some expense, and you really need to figure that out. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about, and these are just some of the expenses. If you're going to do this as a business, I want you to put all these in there. Your phone, your cell phone, and that's an easy one. That's probably the easiest one on the list, because if you have a carrier, which we all do, and you're going to have a business phone, it stays pretty much the same price all the time. The next thing would be if you're going to have a farm vehicle. You're going to have insurance for it, you're going to have repairs for it, and you're going to want to itemize all that out, figure out what those expenses are. The same with all your farm equipment. So we have 2 tractors, a skid loader, and a 4-wheeler that are all used all the time, and we're constantly putting money into them. They're constantly breaking down, they're old, and there's insurance for all them. And those are all expenses that we have to figure out. So I need to allot so much a month to make sure we have money saved so that when something breaks, we can cover it out. For a barn our size with like 36 horses, I can say to myself, okay, I'm going to make sure that I have extra money coming out from each horse. You could say $25 from each horse, and you put that money in a savings so that when you have something big that happens, you can fix it. So just something to think about. Your business and home insurance. And this is super important. People don't even put this on there. They forget about it. But you have to have it. You have to be able to pay for it. So you want to make sure that your insurance, your home and your business insurance is covered and all that. Because if you're doing it as a business, you have to be able to live. And that means you have to be able to pay for your home and your insurance. And also your care, custody, and control insurance, which is a separate insurance. But you equally want to make sure you have that. One of the things your boarders will never think about, but you need to think about when you're figuring out your board prices, are your property taxes. And it's important to know if you're going to buy a place or build, you probably can get some idea of what your taxes are going to be through your township or whoever does all the clerks of courts that keep all the records. But I kind of would get an idea of what your taxes are going to be, because that has to be divided out too. So that's really important, and people forget about that. One of the things that caught us really off guard when we built is we bought my husband's grandfather's farm. And we lived for many years, and the property taxes, because it's all farmland, were pretty low, and it's a little house we live in. And when we built our barn, our property taxes went up. They skyrocketed. And David and I were just shocked. We were shocked because it's a barn that houses animals, that no one lives in it. No people are living in it. And it's agricultural. And so we actually went to the township and actually, I forget what it's called when you don't agree. We didn't agree with what they were saying our place was valued at. And so we had to kind of fight it, and it took a few months, but they finally did lower it a little bit when they looked at other barns in our area. And it was just crazy, but we had no idea, and no one told us. The bank didn't tell us that our taxes were going to go up. No one had told us that our property taxes were going to go up once we built. If you're buying a place that's already built, then you should be able to get that right. That's public knowledge. You should be able to get those records and be able to get that, so you know what you're looking at for property taxes, especially when you figure in the stable, all the land, and the house, if you have a house on the property. And you want to, again, divide that out per horse. Then you have your vehicle insurance, and you want to make sure you have that taken care of. And I guess one of the big things that people forget and they don't put money away for is repairs. And whether it's repairs on equipment or repairs on the barn, you know, things are going to start to wear out. Our barn is 16 years old, and we've had to start doing things to it that, it's money. It costs a lot of money, but we want it to look nice, and it takes money. So you have to have money in a savings account. So that's why it's so important to figure out how much you're going to put away out of each horse that you get money from. What are you going to put away out of that? Are you going to take $10, $15, $20 every month from per horse and put it into a account so that you have a nice savings account, because things are going to wear out? And so I want you to think about that. Now, the next thing that I guess this is probably one of the biggest things that I see that people are losing money at is the labor, the employees. I think for two reasons. One, because sometimes the barn isn't set up in a way to make the job really efficient. So the job is taking a lot longer than it should, and because it's taking longer, you're paying a lot more in employees. The other part of it is, I think it's just a shock and people are not prepared for it. And once you start having someone come, and you have 2 people come or 3 people come, and they're working 6-7 days a week to take care of everything, it really adds up fast. And with that, then your workman's comp goes up, so you have to pay that. And you have your quarterly reports for taxes and employee taxes, all that stuff. So you really want to start getting numbers for that. And what I tell people is, unless you're an accountant and unless you have done that for a living, I would hire someone, because you really could get messed up really fast. And I've seen it happen. I've talked to barn owners who have gotten themselves financially in a mess, and they owe back this taxes, or they don't have enough to pay employees. So then they have to pay the employees, so then something else doesn't get paid. So really start to get numbers and guess and figure out what you can pay these people and what that looks like. And if you're going to have someone that's full-time, you need to figure out what you're going to pay them per hour, and all that adds up very quickly, and people are just caught off guard with that one. Okay, another surprise, and it's something it's really hard to guess for the first year or so, is fuel. And boy, we've seen fuel prices really go up over the last couple months, and everything that my husband does to take care of our farm has now, gosh, it just seems like the fuel has doubled, and it's just skyrocketing. So we have enough cushion in our board rates right now that we can absorb that. But if your board rates are set too low and something like that happens, then you have no cushion, then you're going to start losing money. So I want you to think about what it's going to take to operate your facility. Again, if you're buying a stable that's already been in operation, I hope they have good numbers for you and they have some good record of what they're spending to operate. And if they don't, then you're going to have to start keeping track of that yourself. Unfortunately, like I said, some places don't keep very good records, so then you're guessing again. Okay, some of the costs that people forget about and I think are really important is, one, to have a lawyer that you can contact when you have problems. I hope you never have problems, but we've been sued. We've had to contact our attorney for several different situations throughout the years with borders, disgruntled people. It just happens sometimes with the territory. You just want to make sure you're covered. Well, if you have a good lawyer, it's going to cost money, but I wouldn't do it any other way. Don't go on the cheap. Get someone who can help you, who can get you through if something does go wrong, or a horse gets hurt, or you have an angry client who's threatening, or they're saying stuff on social media that's hurting your business and you need to get that to stop. Those are all real life things that happen, and so it's really important to have a lawyer, and you need to make sure that you're taking a little bit of money out of each board rate. Even if you're not using a lawyer now, you still should be putting money aside for that, so that if you have a problem, you have money to pay your lawyer. It's really important. Same with your accountant. And now, some of the things that you may not have to do with, and a lot of people that own boarding stables have another job, and that other job may carry their medical insurance. So David and I don't. We buy our medical insurance, and we also buy our dental insurance. So that has to come off our board because we have to pay for that. But if you have a job where it pays for, you have good medical insurance, then you don't have to worry about that. But I just want you to keep that in the back of your head. Same with dental. And let me think here. Okay, so some of the other things that people forget about, the one thing you're always going to have is manure, and you have to get rid of it. And I talked to a guy that I was working with in Utah, and him and his wife had a place, and they don't have a place to get rid of it. Like here, my husband's able to put it out in the field. They have to pay someone once a month to come and get it off the property, and he pays a lot of money every month for that. So he has to have that figured into his board rate. So depending on where you live and how you're able to dispose of it, you really want to make sure you know what that's going to cost to get rid of that manure every month if you have to pay someone to come get it. And that should be added onto the board rate. Things like if you have a bathroom you're going to have toilet paper that is just going to be disappearing. You're going to need to supply toilet paper and paper towels and soap and all that stuff. And with a bathroom comes a mound system, and we have to have that checked every year, and they come out, and that costs money to have them do that to make sure it's operating. But per the city, that's how we have to do it. So that's an expense. Any questions at all?
How do you raise a board when you only have 1 or 2 boarders at a small facility?
If you only have 1 or 2 boarders at your home or whatever, and it's just real small, you would raise it like any other way. If you're losing money and you know that the hay is too expensive or whatever else is happening that you know your prices are too low, then I always, when I raise our board, I give our boarders a 2-month notice. And I do that out of respect for them, because I know that if they need to move their horse, sometimes it's hard to get into a place in 30 days. So I always give a 2-month notice. But with 1 or 2 horses, I would probably, talk to them, and you could type up a little letter if you want to. I always like to do that, but I'm assuming if you only have like 2 people, it's a much more personal thing where it's just real casual. But I always say beware, because I've known people that have only boarded a couple horses and they still have some of the same problems a big boarding stable will have. It's just they don't have the financial risk. Excuse me, I have a little cough. So if it's just a couple boarders, figure out your money. If you're only boarding 2 horses, then you're not doing it for a full-time living like we are. So you would have a lot of those expenses. You probably either have a job or your place is paid off, and you have other money coming in. And so you're doing it where you don't want to lose money. Then you want to think about things like hay insurance, if you're still giving grain, if you're doing special services for these horses, are you blanketing, what are some of the jobs you're doing for them. Even if you have 2 horses, there's wear and tear, there's the manure you have to get rid of, there's wear and tear in the place. If they're out on your property grazing, that is land that you have to pay property taxes on. So you kind of want to prorate that out. So think about it. If they're using your facility as far as an indoor arena or outdoor arena, that all has a little bit of maintenance. So you might want to prorate it out. And it's definitely okay to ask for more money. I think that's one of the things is with horses. Some horses are, you can put them out in the field and they do just fine, and a barn owner might just charge $100 or $150 a month. But for care at a place where you have things you have to take care of, you have amenities, all of that costs money. And the property taxes, the cutting the grass, the plowing the snow, making sure the fence is working, making sure things get fixed, it all adds up. So it really, even if you have 2 horses or you have 30 horses, when it's time to raise the board, you just have to do it. And I would give them a 2-month notice. That way they can think about their financial situation. And hopefully, if they're great boarders, they stay and they understand that things go up. Okay. Let me think here.
I have another question.
Oh, I do? Okay, I have another question.
Who do you hire to scoop and take out manure?
So we don't hire anybody because my husband does it. He does all of that, and we put it on our fields. But there are companies that will come and take it. The place in Utah, that the husband and wife that I talked to, there was a company that came and took it, and then they would compost it down for a gardening center. And that's what they did. There's lots of people that will probably take it off your hands. We used to compost it years ago, and we'd sell it ourselves, but we just don't want to do that anymore because it's a lot of extra work. So my husband just puts it out on the field once they get the crops off the field. So, but there are companies that will do it. I would check around. If you live in another state, I would check with other stables how they get rid of it. But if they're going to come get it off your hands, there's a good chance they're going to charge you. So just kind of check around and see. But we are fortunate enough to able to get it off our hands. My husband just puts it out in the field. So, anything else? Okay. So one thing I want to talk about is also when you're setting your board rates, you need to think about, this is all part of it, putting money aside. So if you want to put $50 aside off per horse, 25, whatever it is, put money in a savings account, maybe for repairs, but also for you personally, to have, for other emergencies that come up. That is part of taking care of a farm or taking care of a small stable, whatever it is, it all adds up. I tell people when they're figuring out your board rates, I'm hoping I can explain this good. So let's say that you have 20 stalls and you're going to figure out, okay, what are my stalls going to be to cover all these costs? I want you to set your board rates as if you only have 17 stalls, that you have 3 empty stalls, but you're still going to bring in the same amount of money as if you had 20. The reason being is there are going to be times in your business where you may have an empty stall or 2, and you want to make sure that you are not so short that now you can't pay your bills. So the bank, I can remember the bank saying this to me when we took our loan out, and they were saying, what percentage do you want to be full? I'll tell you what we'd like to see, for a percentage of you being full. So instead of saying percentage, say, okay, we have 20 stalls. I'm going to charge the rate as if I have 17 stalls, but I still need to make this price up here. And then those 2 stalls, that would be your savings account. You would put that away. That would be your savings account for repairs, for everything else. If by chance one of those stalls, someone leaves and the stall's empty for a couple months, you're not going to be hurting so bad. So you want to set yourself up ahead financially. So just set yourself up like you have a couple less empty stalls, but you're going to set it up like the total amount, and that way that money you can just put away. Because like right now in our barn, we have 1 empty stall that we're leaving empty on purpose because we're trying to downsize. But I'm still able to cover all my bills even with that one empty stall. And I have one other person who probably will be moving their horse to the other side of the state in a month or two, and I'm probably going to leave that stall empty too. So that money that's not coming in from there, I'm able to make sure that I have enough of a cushion in my total board rate to absorb that, and it shouldn't affect us really. Because you got to realize you'll be using less hay. That's one big thing, less labor. Some of those expenses will go down a little bit, but also it's just, I can absorb it enough that it won't affect us too much financially. But if you're so tight on your board rate, or it's so low that one person leaves and now you can't sleep at night because you don't have enough to make your bills, that is a really bad place to be, and it's not fun. It's very stressful, and I know that because I was there many years ago, and it's just you don't sleep well because you're worried about money all the time. So I want you to think about that when you're setting your rates and you're thinking about your number of stalls. And I hope I said that correctly. It's hard to I'm trying to explain it right, but you plan on your barn being full, but you bill it like you have a couple empty stalls, so that even though those stalls are full, that's extra money that you can just put away, and all the rest of your bills are completely taken care of. So does that make sense how I'm explaining that, Sherry?
Yep.
It's hard to... Anything else on that?
No.
Okay, what time is it?
It is 7:17.
Okay, let me go through the last couple things here real quick. If you have to arena maintenance, you have to think of things like you're going to be putting sand in your arena probably every other year. There's arena maintenance. If you have, I went to a barn to help them this weekend, and they had a really neat, beautiful track on it. And that all takes money to maintain. It was like a quarter-mile track, and it was awesome. And it was really just a beautiful farm. And I just thought, that you got to make sure you have money put away for stuff. So your amenities, if you have an obstacle course, you have to understand that it's not going to look brand new forever, especially with the weather. So that's going to take money to fix it, keep it looking nice. Your fencing, depending on what type of fencing you have, if you have wood fencing, it's definitely going to cost you more to maintain, whether, because the horses are chewing on it, or, just the weather. So just think about that. The other two things I want to mention real quick is your living expenses for you personally. If you're going to board horses as a living, you're going to have, either you're going to rent or you're going to have your own mortgage, your personal mortgage of a house, or those other, you have to go buy food, you have to be able to live, you have grocery expenses, you could have children, you're doing stuff with them. All that plays a part in being able to live and do this kind of crazy business of boarding horses, like we do for a full-time business. So you really want to, what I would suggest is, what I did, when I have a workshop, I always give out these itemized lists, and it's all these things, and you just take all the months and you just start to get an idea of all your expenses, and you wrap your head around it. See which months you pay the most in, which months you pay the least in. Like, for example, the summertime our electric bill is pretty much nothing, but in the wintertime it really goes up. All those expenses will change during different parts of the year, and then you total it out at the end of the year. And you just want to make sure that you're not losing money, especially if you've gone and you did this huge risk and took out a mortgage and you built a place or you bought a place. There's so much risk involved. So I really want to talk to you. So when you're setting your board rates, honestly, don't get too caught up in what other people have for their board rates. You first got to figure out what you have for expenses, and then you can set your board rate from there. And the truth of the matter is, if you give great care and you're consistent and the horses are happy and they're rested and they are in herds where they get along and you do everything you say you're going to do, then you know what, ask a fair amount. You can ask more for board, because you know what, your time, your effort is worth it, because you're working in all types of weather, because those horses have to be fed and cared for no matter if it's 100 degrees outside or if it's minus 10, and they have to be cared for. So it's definitely worth something, and it's okay to ask more than the other barns in your area. Don't be intimidated by it. I know most people are at first, because I was. But what you do is so valuable, and it's valuable to not only your clients, but to the horses in your care, and also to the industry as a whole. The industry, I think, is hurting in some ways because so many boarding stables are closing. They're just losing money, and they're just not set up correctly. And if you really want to do this right, then do it from here. Don't just set your price according to what the neighbor down the road has for their stable, because you have no idea what their expenses are, and it could make all the difference in the world. And we want to set you up for success here. So I think that is it. If you have any questions at all, you can contact me at probarnmanagement.com anytime, and email me your question. I'd be glad to help you. And just watch. We'll be back next week. And if you have any questions, you can ask early for next week. I haven't thought of a topic yet, but if you have something you'd like for me to talk about, just let us know. And thanks for tuning in. God bless you, and have a wonderful week, and we will see you next Monday.